There's so many exciting things going on in the decentralized AI space. And I think it's a really important moment because it's sort of like when you think about how we ended up in a world where we kind of live our lives through just a handful of corporations in the sort of Web 2 world. Similarly, I think with AI, there's like a real question of, are we going to have just a few giant AI companies that are able to actually afford and have access to the kinds of data that they need to have access to and afford the kind of GPUs that are required to actually create these kinds of systems? Or are we going to live in a world where instead of just having a few companies, you have, decentralized open source models? And so a couple of ways that Filecoin is important to that. One is just data storage. With data storage, there are a lot of really exciting projects in the AI space that are actually working with and building on top of Filecoin, including SingularityNet, Bagel, and many others, which is great. So it's a pretty core component to these kinds of decentralized AI systems. And the other is this idea of being able to build decentralized compute. So something that is similar to Filecoin, but that actually enables you to do compute in a way that is decentralized so that you don't have only a few companies that are able to actually build these models.
Here we are with Marta Belcher, President and Chair of the Filecoin Foundation. Marta, it's so great to have you on the Defiant podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so let's start by the very beginning and get everyone on the same page with what Filecoin is, what it does, and also how you got involved.
Absolutely. So Filecoin is a decentralized file storage network. You can think of it a little bit like Airbnb, but for file storage. So the idea is people all over the world have extra storage capacity on their computer hardware for files, and they can rent out that extra storage capacity to others who can rent storage for their files using Filecoin. So you can imagine, it's a little more complicated than this, but you can imagine it as like a computer program checking to see if those files are still being stored, and if they are, automatically transferring Filecoin. So the idea is that you create this alternative to big tech where instead of having your data stored by Amazon Web Services, Google, or Microsoft, you actually have control over your own data.
So why is this? Well, actually, before that, the second part of my question, your background and your role at Filecoin.
So I'm the president and chair of Filecoin Foundation, which is the governance body for the Filecoin network. I got involved first as I was an attorney in the cryptocurrency space starting back in 2015, worked with a lot of early projects in the crypto space, and got involved with the early team that was building Filecoin at Protocol Labs. And from there, founded the Filecoin Foundation to be the governance body of the network when we got closer to launch.
So it's really interesting. I mean, we were discussing this before, but Filecoin is so early in the whole crypto ecosystem. You were telling me Juan started the project back in 2014, even before Ethereum was around. So it seems like there's something pretty core to decentralized storage. Can you go into why it's important to have decentralized storage?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the thing about data storage is you don't really think about where your data is actually physically stored in the world very often. But when you go to a particular website, for example, almost always the data that you're retrieving is being stored by one of just three companies, Amazon or Microsoft or Google. And that means that you really are living your life through just a handful of corporations, and you have these single points of failure. So sometimes you'll see, for example, AWS have an outage, and then these like massive swaths of the web go down for hours, and you suddenly realize, oh wow, like there really are these single points of failure. And it also means you really have no choice but to trust those big tech companies with your data, right? And that means protecting it from hackers, protecting it from unreasonable government requests or subpoenas, right? Also sorts of reasons that, you really might want to be in control of your own data. And so with Filecoin, the idea is to create a decentralized alternative to things like Amazon Web Services, where instead of a company being in control of your data, users are in control of their own data and can protect their own privacy and security.
Can you talk about the incentives that drive this network? Because people are paying to have their data stored in a decentralized system, but then who is actually participating in this network for it to work?
Yeah, absolutely. So IPFS is which is called the Interplanetary File System, is the storage network that underlies Filecoin. And that actually pre-existed Filecoin. So that went back to 2014 when Protocol Labs was founded. So IPFS was actually much earlier than Filecoin. And IPFS was that decentralized storage layer, but it didn't have any incentives associated with it, right? So if someone was storing a file and they took it offline, there was really no consequence for that, right? It was really all kind of voluntary. And so the idea with Filecoin is, okay, in order to actually create the ability to reliably store files over time, you have to have financial incentives that are tied to that. So for example, you can have, if you are going to be a storage provider on the network, you need to actually post collateral. And that means that if you stop storing files, you lose the collateral. So you have a financial incentive to make sure that the files are continued to be stored, in addition to the incentive of being paid to store the files over time. And what's really cool about using cryptocurrency for this purpose is cryptocurrency effectively allows you to program your money, right? To write a computer program. And, you can say, for every second of a song I play on my computer, automatically transfer a millionth of a cent to the songwriter. And that can happen instantly and automatically. And here you can use that programmable money idea to instead create this incentive of, okay, go and check whether these files are being stored. Okay, if so, automatically transfer Filecoin and use that to make sure that files are stored reliably over time.
So there's this incentive layer on top of IPFS, which is the distributed network for storing data, and then Filecoin is the incentive layer for it. Now, with this incentive layer, how do the cost of data storage compare with traditional, Web 2 data storage systems like AWS and so on?
Yeah, so things are a lot more, often a lot more custom. So it really kind of depends on how things are set up. There are some additional incentive layers on top of the Filecoin network that actually often will incentivize really useful, public data sets to be stored on the network that make it extremely cheap to store data. And then it also really depends on the particular data storage type of data storage. So things like hot storage are different than, when you have giant data sets that need sort of cold storage and archival storage.
Okay, so it depends on what the use case is.
Exactly.
Okay, so and speaking of use cases, I want to talk about the importance of Filecoin for journalism, which obviously is core to us. And we've been really excited to work together with you guys to store all of the Defiant articles on Filecoin to make sure that our content lives forever. This is interesting to me because as a journalist, censorship is an issue for media companies in more sensitive jurisdictions. There's also media has traditionally been such a tough industry to work in, and so many journalists I know just have their whole life's work kind of wiped out when companies they work for are, no longer viable. And so, would love for you to kind of discuss this specific use case.
Yeah, so we have a lot of really amazing companies, nonprofits, individuals in the journalism space that are storing their data on Filecoin and using decentralized technologies like Filecoin for a variety of uses. So one of the cool things about Filecoin is that you can store many copies of your data all over the world in totally different places. And when you go to retrieve the data, it'll kind of retrieve it from wherever's easiest. So if a particular copy is gone, it doesn't matter. You can pull it from somewhere else. So it's much easier to make sure that data is reliably stored over time, which is why when you have really important or sensitive data sets that might be deleted, particularly in a particular jurisdiction, it's a really great use case to be able to store on Filecoin and actually store all over the world. So that's one really important thing. And so you have different organizations, including Freedom of the Press Foundation, that are using this kind of decentralized storage technology in the journalism arena, and also relatedly in the human rights arena. It's often really important to be able to capture data, and not only that, but also be able to cryptographically prove that the data wasn't tampered with. So for example, there are data sets that are evidence of war crimes in Ukraine that are not only preserved on Filecoin, but were actually submitted to the International Criminal Court. And with the ability to cryptographically prove that the digital files were never tampered with.
Interesting. Especially useful now with AI being so prevalent in content creation.
That's right. Exactly.
So one thing that I was concerned about, kind of a media business owner, is whether it would be an issue down the line for my audience to go directly on like Filecoin to read my content, and would that take traffic away from my website? Is that kind of something that's come up at all, or like how can that problem be mitigated? I guess in our case, like our content is stored with delay, so it's like less of an issue. But has that come up at all, or is that a concern?
So there are a variety of different ways that you can store data using Filecoin. And you can think of Filecoin as basically the underlying storage layer, right? And so there's lots of technology that's built on top of Filecoin. And there are different ways to store data on Filecoin. So one way to store data on Filecoin is to store it publicly so that it's publicly accessible, publicly available, can be viewed by anyone. Another way to store data on Filecoin would be to store it in a way that's encrypted. And often when people are interfacing with Filecoin, they're not interfacing with sort of Filecoin directly, but rather they're interfacing with different technologies that are built on top of Filecoin, sort of higher up on the technology stack. So one example is like a lot of companies and individuals work directly with Strata, which is for folks who are doing hot storage. So things that need to be sort of immediately retrievable, they store through Strata. And the fact that data is stored on the Filecoin network, similar to if you were to store something on AWS, doesn't mean that it affects something like your page views.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And, important to kind of clarify that it's not like a replacement to a website. It's, just like the storage system. Then changing gears to AI and decentralized AI. Of course, data is key to this new technology that's now affecting, everything around us. And data has really become even more valuable than before, because it is kind of like the core unit by which AI is created. And so Filecoin and IPFS being a decentralized data storage system, how can that infrastructure help maybe create or support a decentralized AI system? Because right now, like most of the AI companies are centralized, and I've seen a lot of focus and just like this push for decentralized alternatives. So how can Filecoin help with that?
Yeah, there's so many exciting things going on in the decentralized AI space. And I think it's a really important moment because it's sort of like when you think about how we ended up in a world where we kind of live our lives through just a handful of corporations in the sort of Web 2 world. Similarly, I think with AI, there's like a real question of, are we going to have just a few giant AI companies that are able to actually afford and have access to the kinds of data that they need to have access to, and afford the kind of GPUs that are required to actually create these kinds of systems? Or are we going to live in a world where instead of just having a few companies, you have, decentralized open source models? And so a couple of ways that Filecoin is important to that. One is just data storage. And with data storage, there are a lot of really exciting projects in the AI space that are actually working with and building on top of Filecoin, including SingularityNet, Bagel, and many others, which is great. So it's a pretty core component to these kinds of decentralized AI systems. And the other is this idea of being able to build decentralized compute. So something that is similar to Filecoin, but that actually enables you to do compute in a way that is decentralized, so that you don't have only a few companies that are able to actually build these models.
So do you how do you see Filecoin's role in decentralized AI?
Yeah, so I see Filecoin's role as being sort of an important piece of infrastructure that underlies decentralized AI, particularly in the data storage universe. And so we have a lot of these companies like Bagel, SingularityNet, other examples that are already building on top of Filecoin and using Filecoin for storing anything from metadata to the underlying data itself.
Would these AI companies be able to use somehow data stored on Filecoin to train their system?
Yeah, they already are. Okay. It is already happening. So there's a lot of really great use cases in the Filecoin universe already that we're really excited about.
The PR Genius is a top crypto PR and growth marketing agency, helping brands globally with expert PR and strategic growth marketing. They've worked with 300 plus projects like Movement Labs and IO.net. Unlike traditional agencies, they charge only on performance. Their services include earned PR opportunities and marketing services to help boost wallet holders and organic X followers. Learn more at www.theprgenius.com.
Okay, so being the head of the Filecoin Foundation from the very beginning, you have a lot of experience in governance for decentralized systems. How do you, with decentralized AI emerging, what lessons would you say you can recommend these new systems in terms of governance?
Yeah, so that's exactly right, which is that the Filecoin Foundation is the governance body for the Filecoin network. And so what that means is we facilitate the governance process for this open source network. And, we really take a lot of our cues from existing open source projects outside of the crypto space. So things like the Linux Foundation, the Apache Foundation, other crypto didn't invent open source governance, right? Open source governance existed well before crypto. And so for Filecoin Foundation, we really have tried to, as much as possible, adhere to kind of well-trodden paths and principles in the open source governance space. So we facilitate a process called the FIPS process, the Filecoin Improvement Proposals process, which is very similar to what you'll see with sort of Bitcoin or Ethereum. And I think the real question in any kind of open source governance, but also I think that is unique to crypto governance, is in the outside of the crypto space. Open source governance typically means soft consensus. So not like straight up voting, but I mean, actually in the open source universe, you would do hum voting. So you would just kind of get a sense of the room based on a hum, like, is there kind of rough consensus? And there's this idea of rough consensus and running code, right? So not totally different than the kind of like token holder voting that you see in the crypto space. And so crypto in a lot of ways has diverged from traditional open source governance methods by actually introducing straight up hard consensus mechanisms like token holder voting. So it's a really interesting question, I think, for the decentralized AI space, which is, will they take the approach of the sort of traditional open source governance model, which is a soft consensus model, or is there some way of doing governance that they prefer that is a hard consensus type of model?
It's such an interesting topic because I don't know if you agree, but it doesn't seem like there's like one clear-cut way of doing things. Like, because on one hand, you can argue, hard governance with like token holder votes seems more objective, but at the same time, with in practice, DAO governance, you see how that can be problematic with whales controlling the vote, and it not being actually kind of democratic, but more like a plutocracy sort of system. But also, like, the soft governance has its own issues. Like, how can you ensure that you're being objective, that everyone is participating? So would love kind of more of your thoughts on that. Like, what have you found to be a good balance, at least in the Filecoin Foundation's case?
Yeah, so I think everything you're saying is exactly right, which is that it's a really hard problem. Like, and like governance is hard is not like a particularly like insightful thing to say, because governance is also hard like in the real world. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's not, this is also not a unique like hard problem. But I think you're completely right, which is that just straight hard consensus, so just token holder voting, has a lot of issues, and it particularly has issues if you have a network that has a lot of different types of stakeholders. So, for example, in the Filecoin network, it's not just Filecoin. There are many cryptocurrencies out there that are really just a token, right? Like, maybe they're a token with a meme, or just like literally just like all they do is they're a token. Yeah. Whereas in Filecoin, we have this whole literal decentralized file storage network that is an alternative to AWS. It's like this real thing that is well beyond just sort of just token holders, right? And so there are all these other stakeholders, including like storage providers, right? Like storage client, like there are all sorts of users and stakeholders that are not just token holders, which is why we've taken a much more nuanced approach than just straight token holder voting. And so I think it all depends on the particular network and, what the sort of mechanics of that network are and the dynamics of the ecosystem. When you have multiple different stakeholders, you can do different types of voting, with different stakeholder groups having different weights, right? But it's all very, very difficult. And I think ultimately the right mix is, for many networks, not all networks, is sort of a hybrid, which is like a soft consensus mechanism that is similar to traditional open source governance for most things, and then hard consensus mechanisms only when absolutely required. And that's not true for all networks, but for many networks, I think that kind of hybrid is the right approach.
Yeah, makes sense. In Filecoin's case, what kinds of decisions are made by governance?
Yeah, so I mean, decisions are like any kind of network upgrade, right? So very, very similar to what you would see with Bitcoin, Ethereum, other things. Also, like crypto economics of the network, right? How do the different incentive mechanisms play in? What are the crypto economics, right? And even things that are like a lot more sort of ephemeral, like, are we going to call storage providers, or are we going to call them miners, right? Like things like that get changed through the FIPS process. So very similar to kind of what you would see in the Bitcoin or Ethereum worlds.
Perfect. Okay, shifting gears a little bit to regulation, which has been such a major topic this year, or really since the new U.S. administration took over, just like upending the way crypto, had been, just how the ecosystem was evolving into a much friendlier place. So in the case of Filecoin and what we've been talking about, like Filecoin as infrastructure for AI, you're at this kind of convergence between two really big emerging technologies, crypto and AI. And so with emerging technologies, there's always this like tension with regulation, like how much oversight is needed to protect users while at the same time not stifling innovation. So what have you seen with this administration so far? And are there, what's kind of your outlook in regulation in this kind of like crypto AI intersection?
Yeah, totally. So in the crypto space, the sort of regulatory uncertainty around the issue of under what circumstances are cryptocurrencies securities in the US has been one that has been really, really difficult and made it very difficult for companies to operate in the US for a long time. Initially, the issue was that it was just unclear, right? There was just a lack of clarity around the issue. And then in the previous administration, basically because of that lack of clarity, we had an administration that basically filed a bunch of lawsuits and alleged that almost every single cryptocurrency was an unregistered security in the United States, which caused a huge exodus of companies from the United States, unfortunately. And that approach of sort of just straight up enforcement against effectively the entire industry without having any clear path for those companies or any clarity around that issue was just pretty devastating for the industry in the US. And this administration and what we've seen with Congress in the past year or so is a real dedication to getting that clarity through legislation. So there are some really important bills that are moving their way through Congress now that are absolutely critical, I think, to the future of cryptocurrency in the United States, because they really clarify, those regulatory boundaries, including the critical question of, when cryptocurrencies sort of are and aren't securities, and sort of a path to compliance for cryptocurrencies. And that is just absolutely existential, I think, for being able to make sure that crypto companies can actually operate in the US without that sense that there will be another administration like the previous administration that will just go after the entire industry again.
Are there any changes in your roadmap or like the way you are conducting your business or your network that have changed because of this kind of friendlier regulatory climate?
I think for us, it's important for us to see that the legislation actually gets passed, right? So the particular legislation I'm talking about is what's called the market structure bill that's making its way through Congress. And I think that whether or not that gets passed is going to have it's a huge sort of turning point for cryptocurrency in the US. And I do think that it is not a given that legislation will pass, especially because next year is a midterm year. And typically things don't really move in a midterm year in Congress. And after the midterms, who knows what Congress's makeup will look like and whether it will be possible to get a bill like this through. And I do also think that it's totally possible that because of there could be sort of backlash against the crypto industry for a variety of reasons. So I really think that the critical question is whether this legislation is going to pass this year. Because if it doesn't pass this year, I think it's a pretty bad sign for the future of crypto in the US. And if it does pass this year, makes it to the president's desk and is signed and is, enacted into law, then I think the crypto space is going to be set up for success long-term in the US. But I think it's a real turning point. And I think until we find out whether that legislation is going to pass, we're still very much in flux.
What are the more specific implications that passing the market structure bill would have on both Filecoin and crypto broadly? Yeah,
so broadly, the idea is being able to clarify. There is arguably an ambiguity on under what circumstances are cryptocurrencies securities that allowed the previous administration to file lawsuits and allege in those lawsuits that literally almost every single major cryptocurrency was a security, was an unregistered security. And that that the ability of the administration to do that was based on the lack of clarity. And so the idea with this bill is it clarifies sort of under what circumstances cryptocurrencies are and are not securities, right? And sort of like it's a little more complicated than that, but that's sort of the high level takeaway. And that means that a future administration wouldn't be able to sort of exploit that lack of clarity to go after the entire industry.
What if sending crypto felt more human? Pulse just launched Red Packets, a new way to gift tokens with meaning. It's gasless, gamified, and claimable inside group chats only. Think airdrops meet social cues on-chain. Backed by smart wallet tech and live across major L2s, Red Packets turned communities into microeconomies of gratitude and growth. No seed phrases, no friction, just connection with value. Check it out at pulse.social.
If the market structure bill passes and like tokens like Filecoins are not considered, or there's like clarity on like what their status is, then what would that mean for you? Like what kinds of use cases or actions or activations would you be able to do that you're kind of that you need to be more cautious with now?
Yeah, so I think that it's, I think more so than Filecoin in particular, I think, the many token projects relocated abroad or didn't, chose not to incorporate in the US or chose to not have any US based token holders, right? Or otherwise geo-block or limit the involvement of anyone from the US in that token. And so I think more broadly, the question is whether that exodus from the US continues and whether this innovation and this entire industry is kind of pushed abroad, or whether those projects can actually start to move back to the US, incorporate in the US in the first place, have US people in the US actually participate in the networks in various ways, in ways that they're currently not allowed to, because of the risk that comes from the regulatory uncertainty and the approach of the previous administration.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's really kind of hard to understand for me how the lawmakers, people in Congress, like the people kind of, leading policy in the US could just miss out on being the hub for such an important technology. So I don't know, hopefully everyone kind of sees that's the case and wants the US to be leaders in crypto in the future. So we shall see.
Totally agree.
But yeah, definitely such kind of pivotal times that we're living in right now with, on the stablecoin side, like the Genius bill passing through Congress next week will be key. And then with the market structure bill, definitely, can be kind of world changing for crypto. So shifting gears a little bit to if your kind of latest developments and milestones that you're looking forward to, what have been kind of the major milestones for Filecoin in this year so far? I know that there's the like Filecoin EVM. How do smart contracts change things for Filecoin? And I don't know, any other kind of significant developments that you think are, interesting to highlight?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on in the Filecoin universe. So we have all sorts of really amazing use cases popping up every day. The Defiant storing, on Filecoin is one of many examples of, really exciting new use cases. We also have really amazing and interesting public data sets being stored on the network. So for example, the Smithsonian recently started storing their files on the Filecoin network, which is really exciting.
That's awesome.
We also have a project that we work with the Internet Archive on that's called Democracy's Library. And the Democracy's Library project is all about preserving government data around the world and making sure that it remains accessible to the public, even when, for example, there's an administration change and a next administration comes in and, wipes out data that was created or stored by the previous administration. And so the Democracy's Library Project has been a focus of ours for several years, and it has led to really important data sets from around the world being preserved on the Filecoin network. So that's another example. There's a lot going on with AI data sets being stored on the network and lots of new AI partnerships. There's also a lot of Web3 chain storage and other kind of Web3 use cases for Filecoin, which is really exciting. So we've been really excited to see adoption pick up and the amount of utility in the network increasing over time as we've got these really amazing use cases on the network.
Very cool. Speaking of like Web3 use cases, there have been some data-focused chains launching recently. I think Celestia is kind of the the leading one there. Is that an area that Filecoin competes with, or is that a use case that you can provide, like kind of being like a supplement to data storage for like blockchains themselves, like with Ethereum doing so much work to offload its data from layer one with blobs, and Celeste is kind of pitching itself as being a solution to this. Can Filecoin also step in and to do that?
Yeah, so Filecoin does do chain data storage. So, for example, Solana, there was a whole partnership with Solana that was announced, I think it was like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. So all sorts of chain data storage. And I think one thing that's really important to understand about the data storage area is that data storage isn't all one thing. So the data storage market actually has a lot of different segments, and different types of customers need totally different things. So, some like a scientific data set that's like a humongous amount of data that, can kind of be in cold storage, like archival data is like one example that is very different than things like hot storage, where you really need things to be, rapidly retrievable, right? And so the way that the Filecoin network works is we have different, there's Filecoin, which is kind of the underlying technology, and then we have different, data onboarding ramps and other technologies that are building on top of Filecoin, which serve sort of different markets. And so I think that's one thing that's really important to understand about data storage.
Okay, so in Filecoin's case, I'm guessing or assuming, correct me if this is wrong, but that Filecoin would be more useful for the like archival storage for chains?
So we have all sorts of different onboarding ramps that go after kind of different markets, right? So so there is archival data. That's definitely like one segment that is super popular. Another segment that's really popular, for example, is NFTs. So like almost all NFTs are actually stored on Filecoin or IPFS. Like the vast majority of NFTs are stored, because you don't want to have a situation where you paid $60,000 for an NFT or whatever, $6 million.
Yeah, that was a big issue.
Right. And then suddenly someone stops paying their AWS bill and then it disappears, right? You don't want to have that happen. So, so that's an example of like where there's a lot of adoption of Filecoin, because it's such a sort of use case, right? Like that you would want to store on IPFS or Filecoin if you have an NFT. But then there is also, like I think I mentioned, Sriracha is an example of a hot storage onboarding ramp that's built on top of Filecoin. That's for more of a hot storage market.
Okay, so yeah, speaking of adoption, would love to get a sense of how big Filecoin is, and if you have a sense of market share at all, or at least like how much is actually stored on Filecoin.
Yeah, so the latest network stats are that we have about 3.7 exabytes of storage capacity and about 1.1 exabytes of storage actually used on the network. And so just to give you a sense of that, that is if you took all of the written works of mankind from the beginning of written history to today, you could store that on the network 10 times over. So it's a huge amount of data, storage capacity, and a lot of that is actually being utilized. And, I remember before Filecoin launched, there was like a lot of conversations around like, are we ever going to have like an exabyte of storage capacity? Like, wouldn't that be amazing? And the thing that's been really cool is to see, really how quickly we were able to get to, not just 1 exabyte of storage capacity, but in this case, at the current moment, 3.7 exabytes of storage capacity with over an exabyte that's actually being used.
Oh, interesting. So going forward, what are your plans to continue growing this?
Yeah. So, the thing that is so cool about the Filecoin network is really that it's this huge ecosystem of all these amazing different participants. So we have storage clients. I've talked about some of them, right? And they're all sorts of different. They're all sorts of different types of organizations. Everything from universities to scientists with giant data sets to the Smithsonian, right? To governments, right? So really having this really diverse group of clients is so interesting and all these very cool use cases. I think also having this very active community building, providing storage, right? We have storage providers all around the world and in many different jurisdictions. That's something that's really amazing about the Filecoin network. And then finally, the developer community, right? So the community of people who are building applications on top of the network, who are, plugging Filecoin into their existing technology is just like a really amazing, very large community of people, in this great sort of like open source, somewhat chaotic, but really wonderful universe of people.
Going forward, like, is there like a specific group, like use case that you see has most potential or that Filecoin is focusing on?
Yeah. So, I think for us, what's really important, I've talked a few times about the sort of network, about the market segmentation, and how different types of clients have, different sets of needs. So for us, I think a lot of this is having multiple different types of onboarding ramps that can support those different types of clients, and then seeing where you really get the easy product market fit, right? Like NFTs was a good example of like such fast product market fit with Filecoin. Like it was the natural thing for almost all, really the vast majority of NFTs to be stored on Filecoin and IPFS. And so, for us, focusing on these different segments and having really solid, user-friendly, seamless onboarding ramps for multiple segments, and then seeing which of those segments takes off is our sort of path to making sure we have product market fit in multiple segments.
Any one segment that is looking like really promising right now, or that like you're particularly excited about?
Well, there's a bunch of different segments where we have different onboarding ramps, right? And as I mentioned, like NFTs was an example of a market segment that just took off, right? And was, super, like very much like a product market fit. For us, we have, I think Web3 object storage, so including like chain storage is one example where we have, I think, a lot of natural fit. But there are other segments as well that, we are making sure to, address and see if those are things that are going to lead to additional product market fit in those segments.
Nice. Okay. To start wrapping up, what are kind of major development milestones or, things on the roadmap that you're excited about in kind of the next few months?
So we have some very exciting things in the works on the technical side of sort of the fundamentals of how the network works, and some really exciting ways that the network will be upgraded that are going to be announced very soon. So stay tuned for more pretty exciting updates from the Filecoin network coming up in the near future.
Oh, okay. See, you're being very mysterious, but we'll have to wait and report on those things on the Defiant when they're public. Great. Okay. And then finally, would love to get a sense from you on just like big long-term vision for Filecoin? Like if everything goes well and Filecoin succeeds or wins, does that mean like Filecoin replaces Web 2 storage systems, or like what's a big long-term vision?
Yeah, so there's sort of 3 reasons that Filecoin exists as I see it. And that are sort of like our why of like why why are we even doing this? Like, why does Filecoin exist? So the first is to preserve humanity's most important data, which is actually our mission statement, which is, we want to make sure that the most important data in the world is reliably stored over a long period of time, including, these very sensitive data sets that we've talked about, that making sure that data can be stored and not subject to single points of failure. The second is we want to create alternatives to big tech that put people in control of their own data, right? So we want people to be able to store their data in an easy way, in a way that doesn't mean that they are subject to having, their data controlled by some large corporation and having no other choice for that. So we want to create alternatives to big tech. And then the third is that we really want to bake civil liberties into the next generation of the web. So we want the next generation of the web to be censorship resistant, right? To have other sort of civil liberties protections actually baked into it. So those are the 3 reasons that I think we at Filecoin Foundation, do what we do.
Amazing, Marta. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been fascinating. Very excited to hear about like all the latest on Filecoin. Even happier than before that, happier than ever that we're working with you guys to store all of our articles on the network. So look forward to continuing covering all of these developments.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been so great and we're so thrilled to have the Defiant storing your data on the network as well.
Yay. All right.